My name is Carol McIntyre, and I never imagined I would sit here telling you about the night my own daughter betrayed me. I am 61 years old, a widow, a mother of two, and I thought I had raised my children to be good and kind. But nothing prepares you for the moment you realize the person you gave everything to would rather see you humiliated than hear you say no. It happened on a cold Tuesday evening in November at Franco's, an Italian restaurant in downtown Minneapolis. I'd been there before years ago when my late husband Harold surprised me with dinner for our 25th anniversary. Back then, the place felt warm and intimate with its soft lights and quiet corners. That night, it felt like a stage, and I was the only one who hadn't seen the script. Ashley called me 2 days before asking if we could meet for dinner. She said she'd been thinking about what we argued about weeks earlier and wanted to talk. I had been hopeful. She was my daughter after all, and she was carrying my first grandchild. I let myself believe she wanted to mend things. When I walked into Franco's, Ashley was already seated at a table in the back, dressed in a sleek black dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Her hair was curled softly around her face, and she smiled as if nothing had happened between us. I smiled back because that's what mothers do even when our hearts feel like glass. She stood to hug me and told me how beautiful I looked. I almost believed her. For a few minutes, it felt normal again. She asked how I'd been, if I was keeping warm, if I still worked in the garden, even with the frost. I answered her questions and watched her hands resting on her belly, like she was cradling her whole future. Then he arrived, Henry, her fiancé. Behind him were 3 men in dark suits I didn't recognize. They each carried thin briefcases and didn't bother to smile when they sat down. My stomach dropped. This wasn't dinner. This was something else. I tried to keep my voice calm as I asked who they were. Ashley didn't meet my eyes. Henry explained they were lawyers there to help me make things easier and get everything squared away. That was when one of them slid a manila folder across the table and said all I needed to do was sign. Inside were documents giving Henry and Ashley full power of attorney over my accounts, my home, my insurance, everything Harold and I built together. I didn't even have to ask why. Ashley finally looked at me, then her eyes steady and cold, and told me if I didn't sign, I'd never see my grandson, that it was my choice. And in that moment, sitting there in the warm glow of Franco's, surrounded by people who didn't know or care what was happening at my table, I felt the kind of heartbreak no mother should ever have to feel. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just stared back at my daughter and wondered how we ever got here. When I think about the family I thought I knew, my heart feels heavy in a way I can't quite put into words. There was a time when my world felt full of love and purpose, and everything I did was for them. I remember those years with a kind of bittersweet pride, now knowing what they cost me and what I thought they meant to us all. I married Harold when I was 22, and we settled into a small 2-bedroom house in South Minneapolis. He was steady and dependable, a man who believed in working hard and coming home for dinner every night. We didn't have much, but we had each other and big plans for the life we'd build. When Lucas was born a year later, we painted his nursery pale blue and stayed up nights just watching him sleep. 2 years after that, Ashley came into our lives. She was so tiny, with a head full of dark hair and lungs that could wake the whole block. Harold used to joke that she'd grow up to run the world, and back then, it made me smile. Those early years felt like a blur of birthday parties, skinned knees, and bedtime stories. I still remember the way their little hands reached for mine when they were scared, or the way they would run into my arms when Harold came home late from the plant. We never had much extra money, but it didn't matter to me. I clipped coupons, took on sewing for neighbors, and learned how to stretch every dollar. Harold always told me I made $1 do the work of 3. When the water heater broke one winter, we both wore our coats inside for a month until we could afford to fix it. And yet, looking back, I never felt deprived. Everything we had went toward the kids. I made their Halloween costumes by hand every year. I made sure they both had field trip money, new shoes when they grew, and even music lessons when Lucas wanted to learn the trumpet. When Ashley asked for dance classes, I sold my wedding china to pay for the tuition. Those were the kinds of sacrifices I made without a second thought. When Harold got sick, everything changed. The cancer came on fast, and within a year, I found myself sitting alone in a hospital room, holding his hand as the monitors went quiet. I still remember the way his fingers felt in mine, how he tried to whisper that he was sorry for leaving me with everything. I told him not to be silly. I told him we would be fine, and for a while we were. I picked up more hours as a secretary at the law firm. I sold the house and moved us into a smaller duplex closer to work. Lucas was already in college by then, and Ashley was starting high school. I worked late nights, skipped lunches, and scrimped everywhere I could to keep paying Lucas's tuition so he wouldn't have to take out loans. When Ashley wanted to join the cheerleading team her junior year, I found a way to buy her the uniform, even though I had holes in my winter boots. There were times I lay awake at night, wondering if they noticed how much I was giving up. I told myself it didn't matter as long as they were happy and could go farther in life than Harold and I ever did. And in a way, they did. Lucas went on to medical school, and Ashley got into college on a scholarship and later found a job in marketing. I remember feeling so proud sitting in the audience at her graduation, wearing the same burgundy dress I'd worn to Lucas's ceremony. That dress still hangs in my closet now. I can still picture Ashley's smile that day, how she hugged me and called me the best mom in the world. Those words stayed with me through the lonely nights when the house felt too quiet, and through the years when I learned how to balance checkbooks and fix leaky faucets on my own. I never thought they would be the last kind words she said to me for a long time. I thought I knew my family. I thought everything I'd poured into them, all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, all the little dreams I'd set aside, meant we would always take care of each other. That's what family is supposed to be. I never dreamed one of my children would grow up to see me as an obstacle instead of a mother. Now, when I think back on those warm memories, there's a shadow to them. I still see the little girl who used to pick dandelions from the yard and hand them to me like they were roses. But now I know what she's capable of, and it hurts more than anything I could have imagined. And yet, even knowing that I can't stop myself from remembering the way she used to wrap her arms around my waist and tell me she loved me more than anything, those memories are still mine, even if she isn't quite the same little girl anymore. And that's what makes it all so hard. I gave her everything I had, and somehow that still wasn't enough. The first cracks in Ashley began to show not long after she started dating Henry. At first, I thought he was just another young man trying to make his way in the world. He dressed well, spoke confidently, and drove a car much nicer than any I'd ever owned. Ashley seemed smitten, and I didn't want to ruin her happiness with my quiet doubts. But even in those early months, I noticed the little changes in her. She started showing up to family dinners in designer clothes I knew she couldn't afford on her own. She talked about Henry's job in real estate like it was some glamorous empire and said she deserved the same kind of lifestyle. Once she laughed at the casserole I'd made and asked if I'd ever thought of hiring a caterer for holidays. I brushed it off as her growing up, finding her voice, maybe even being influenced by someone new. But deep down, I felt something sharp in her words. Henry was always polite, but there was something about his smile that never reached his eyes. He called me ma'am and shook my hand too firmly. He'd make little jokes about the neighborhood I lived in, about how small my duplex was, about how hard it must be to keep up with all those old bills on my own. He made it sound like he was concerned, but I could tell he was looking down at me. It got worse after they got engaged. Ashley came over one Sunday afternoon and sat at my kitchen table with a wedding planner's folder so thick it barely fit on the surface. She started laying out photos of venues, menus, and dresses while she talked fast about destination honeymoons and custom invitations. I listened as long as I could before I finally asked her what she wanted from me. That was when she dropped the number. $65,000. At first I thought I'd misheard her. She said it again slowly this time, like I was a child who needed help understanding. $65,000. She said it was only fair since she and Henry didn't have much saved, and I'd been sitting on what she called a small fortune from Dad's insurance. I felt my face go hot. I told her that money was my safety net, that it was meant for my retirement, for emergencies, for when my health eventually failed. I reminded her how hard her father had worked for every penny and how much I'd scrimped to keep it safe all these years. But she just rolled her eyes. She told me I was selfish, that I cared more about my precious nest egg than about her happiness. She said I was bitter and small-minded, and that she couldn't believe she had a mother who would rather sit on her money than see her own daughter get married the right way. I felt like she'd slapped me. I tried to explain that I wasn't saying no completely. I told her I could give her $15,000 enough for a nice ceremony here in Minneapolis, something tasteful and beautiful. But when I said it, she laughed like I'd offered her pocket change. She called me pathetic. It was the first time I'd seen that look in her eyes. Cold. Calculating. Like I was just another obstacle she needed to push past to get what she wanted. And yet, even as she stormed out of my kitchen, slamming the door behind her, I found myself wondering what I'd done wrong. That night, I sat at the table long after she'd gone, staring at the folder she'd left behind. It was full of glossy pictures of ballrooms, honeymoon resorts, and flower arrangements I couldn't even name. I flipped through it page by page, my hands shaking. I'd always thought I'd done everything for her, given everything I had to give. But looking at those pictures, I started to wonder if she'd been learning all along how to take more. The cracks didn't come all at once. They came slowly in quiet comments and sharp glances in the way she stopped calling unless she wanted something. But after that day in my kitchen, I couldn't pretend anymore. Something in her had changed. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if she'd ever been the daughter I thought she was. When Ashley called me that Sunday afternoon, asking if we could have dinner at Franco's, I let myself believe she was ready to talk. It had been 3 weeks since the argument in my kitchen, and the silence between us had grown heavier by the day. When she said she wanted to make things right, my chest ached with something like hope, and I didn't stop to question it. Franco's had always been a special place to me. Harold and I used to come here for anniversaries. It was quiet, intimate, and lit with that soft golden glow that made everything seem a little more forgiving. As I smoothed my burgundy dress and stepped through the front door, the smell of garlic and wine wrapped around me like an old memory. Ashley was already there, sitting at a corner table, dressed in a sleek navy dress that hugged her growing belly. Her hair fell in loose curls, and she looked radiant in the way only expectant mothers do. When she saw me, she stood quickly and came toward me with open arms. "Mom, you look beautiful." Her voice was warm, her perfume familiar. For a moment, it was easy to believe we were still who we used to be. I held her just a second longer than she held me. We sat, and she asked how I was. I told her I'd been keeping busy with my garden, though the frost was already starting to kill off what was left of the tomatoes. She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She told me the second trimester was easier. She patted her belly with a kind of pride that made my throat tighten. I started to say how proud I was of her, how I missed her, but she cut me off. "Henry should be here any minute. He got held up at work." She glanced toward the door like she was expecting someone else too. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Henry walked in. But he wasn't alone. 3 men in dark suits followed behind him. Each carried a slim briefcase and moved with the kind of purpose you see in people who already know the outcome. My stomach dropped. Henry smiled too wide when he reached the table. "Mrs. McIntyre, thank you for joining us." He gestured for the men to sit. One by one, they slid into the seats around us, turning what was supposed to be a quiet dinner into a business meeting. I stared at Ashley, but she wouldn't look at me. Henry leaned forward and began speaking, his tone smooth, rehearsed. "We've asked you here tonight to talk about your future." He paused just long enough to let that sink in. "And the future of your family." One of the men opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table toward me. I didn't move to pick it up. "It's really quite simple, Mrs. McIntyre," Henry continued. "We just want to help you manage your finances more effectively. You've done such a good job holding things together all these years, but with your age and health, it just makes sense to let someone younger handle things now." My age, my health. I felt my face flush with a mix of anger and humiliation. The man nearest me tapped the folder and spoke for the first time. "Inside, you'll find documents granting power of attorney to your daughter and Mr. Smith. All you need to do is sign here and here." He pointed with a manicured finger. I still didn't move. Instead, I looked at Ashley. "Ashley, what is this?" My voice came out lower than I meant it to. She finally looked up at me then, and what I saw in her eyes made my chest ache. "It's just paperwork, Mom," she said softly. "We're only trying to help you." "Help me." I repeated the words and let them hang there. That's when Henry leaned back in his chair and smiled again. "Of course, if you'd rather not sign, that's your choice." He turned to Ashley, and she nodded once before looking at me again. "Then you won't see your grandson grow up." "It's your choice, Mom." The words didn't register at first. I just sat there staring at her, the little girl who used to run barefoot through the yard with dandelions clutched in her fist. I wanted to tell her how cruel that was, how wrong. But the words wouldn't come. The restaurant around us kept humming with quiet conversations, soft jazz playing in the background, wine glasses clinking. No one else seemed to notice my world was falling apart right there at table 12. I swallowed hard and finally looked down at the folder. My hands were shaking. I could see Harold's face in my mind. The long nights he worked the pennies we'd saved, the way he'd made me promise to protect what we'd built for the kids. I took a deep breath and forced myself to look back at Ashley. "You'd really do that? You'd keep him from me?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't answer. That silence was louder than anything she could have said. Henry glanced at his watch like he had somewhere better to be. One of the lawyers started shuffling papers, impatient. And all I could think was how we got here. How my little girl turned into a stranger who could look me in the eye and say those words. It wasn't anger that I felt then. Not yet. It was something colder. Something heavier. Betrayal sits in your chest like a stone. And in that moment, I finally understood how heavy it could be. I was still staring down at the folder when I heard the hostess's voice behind me. There was a quiet shuffle of feet, and then a familiar hand rested on my shoulder. "Mom." Lucas's voice cut through the tension at the table like a clean blade. My head snapped up, and for the first time all evening, I could breathe. He stood there in his scrubs, his hospital badge still clipped to his pocket, his dark hair slightly mussed, like he'd left work in a hurry. His eyes swept the table, taking in the lawyers, Henry's smug smile, Ashley's downturned gaze, and finally landed on me. He didn't say anything at first, but his hand stayed firm on my shoulder, steady and reassuring. I called him earlier after Ashley had hung up the phone. Something in her voice when she invited me to dinner had set off a quiet alarm in me. I had dialed Lucas on instinct, told him where I was going, and asked if he could come if I needed him. And now, here he was, just when I thought I was completely alone. Henry stood, stretching his hand across the table. "You must be Lucas. I've heard so much about you." Lucas didn't take it. He just nodded slightly and pulled out a chair beside me. "I don't think we've met, but I'm guessing you're Henry." The room felt different the moment Lucas sat down. Henry's confident grin faltered just a little. The lawyers exchanged glances but didn't speak. Even Ashley looked up at her brother with something like doubt in her eyes. Lucas leaned back in his chair and finally looked directly at Henry. "So, power of attorney. That what this is about? Henry cleared his throat. Well, yes, it's really just a formality. For her own good, of course. Lucas let out a short laugh. For her own good. He glanced at me, his eyes softening. Mom, did you ask anyone here to manage your finances? I shook my head. No. Lucas turned back to Henry, his expression sharpening. Then I think you can put the papers away. One of the lawyers opened his mouth, but Lucas cut him off. Don't bother explaining it to me. I work in an emergency room. I know what manipulation looks like. Henry's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, trying to regain control of the moment. Look, we're trying to make sure she's taken care of. She's on her own. She's vulnerable. Lucas leaned forward too, his voice calm, but full of steel. She's not on her own. And she's not vulnerable. Not anymore. I felt something loosen in my chest as I watched him. A strange mix of shame and gratitude rose up in me all at once. Part of me hated that I needed him to come rescue me like this, but another part of me couldn't stop the quiet relief I felt just having him there. Ashley finally spoke, then her voice softer than I expected. Lucas, you don't understand. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone. Lucas looked at her for a long time before he answered. No, Ashley. You're trying to do what's best for you. And there's a difference. She flinched like he'd struck her, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But then she just looked away, her hands folding in her lap. Lucas leaned back again and turned to me. Mom, you don't have to sign anything tonight. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. The words settled over me like a warm blanket. For the first time that night, I sat up a little straighter. Henry didn't speak again. The lawyers busied themselves gathering up the papers. The power in the room had shifted, and everyone at the table felt it. Lucas stayed seated beside me, his hand resting lightly on mine. He didn't say another word, but he didn't have to. Just having him there was enough to remind me who I was and what I was worth. And for the first time that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Hope that this wasn't over yet. Hope that I still had more fight in me than they realized. Just as I was starting to find my footing again with Lucas at my side, the front door of the restaurant swung open and another familiar figure stepped inside. Louise Qualls, my attorney, walked in with a calm determination that turned every head in her path. She was small and silver-haired, wearing a crisp navy suit and carrying a leather portfolio tucked neatly under one arm. The air seemed to shift as she approached our table. Good evening, Mrs. McIntyre. Louise's voice was smooth and polite, but there was an edge to it that made Henry's smile falter. Sorry I'm late, she added, setting her portfolio on the table with a quiet confidence. I thought it might be best if I sat in on this little discussion. Henry cleared his throat and tried to sound casual. I wasn't aware legal counsel was necessary tonight. This is a family matter. Louise met his gaze without blinking. That's exactly why I'm here. One of Henry's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Ashley finally looked up at me, her expression turning from confusion to unease. Louise took her time opening her portfolio, pulling out a thick stack of documents. Let's make something clear, she said, sliding the papers toward me. Mrs. McIntyre already has a fully executed irrevocable trust. She placed a finger on the title page, making sure Henry and the others could see it. Her assets are no longer in her name. They're held in the trust for the benefit of her children, with Dr. Lucas McIntyre as trustee until the beneficiaries reach the age of 25. The words hung in the air as Henry's smile finally dropped. He reached for the papers, flipping through them quickly, his confidence cracking with every page. Ashley's face went pale. Louise continued without missing a beat. This trust was executed 2 weeks ago. Mrs. McIntyre consulted with me after receiving your initial demands, and we ensured her finances were fully protected from outside influence. Henry tried to recover his composure. That doesn't change the fact she needs someone competent managing her affairs. Louise raised an eyebrow and pulled out another folder. Ah, yes, about that. She spread a series of photographs and printed emails on the table. Here we have evidence of Mr. Smith's surveillance of my client's home and accounts. She tapped one photo showing Henry parked outside my house. Here we have correspondence with a private investigator regarding her mental state and banking habits. And here she added, pointing to an email, is a request for medical records sent without her consent. Henry's jaw clenched as the color drained from his face. One of his lawyers leaned in and whispered something, but Henry didn't respond. Ashley finally found her voice. Mom, I didn't know about any of this. I looked at her calmly, the same way she had looked at me earlier. Then you should have. Louise gathered the papers neatly into a stack. This pattern of behavior demonstrates a clear intent to establish a false narrative of incompetence in order to gain control of Mrs. McIntyre's assets. That's not just unethical. In some jurisdictions, it's criminal. Henry's lawyers visibly pulled back. One of them closed his briefcase and muttered something about needing to confer privately. Henry stayed frozen, staring down at the table. Louise leaned back in her chair, her tone calm but cutting. I suggest you and your client consider your next steps carefully. Ashley looked between me and Henry, her eyes wide with a kind of dawning horror. I thought I saw tears start to form, but I didn't let myself feel sorry for her. Not yet. I sat a little straighter in my chair, my hand still resting on Lucas's. For the first time all night, I felt taller than the people across from me. The woman they thought they could corner and manipulate was gone. The woman sitting here now was someone they couldn't move. Henry was the first to stand. His chair scraped hard against the floor as he shoved it back, his face red with anger he could no longer disguise. He grabbed his jacket and glared at Louise, then at me, as though his fury alone could undo everything that had just unfolded. You'll regret this, he said under his breath, but his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Without waiting for Ashley or the lawyers, he stormed toward the door, his expensive shoes pounding against the tile, as the other diners glanced up at the commotion. One by one, his lawyers followed, collecting their papers quickly and keeping their heads down, none of them daring to meet my eyes as they filed out behind him. Ashley stayed seated, staring at the table, her hands trembling in her lap. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. I watched her for a long moment, my chest heavy, but my resolve steady. She finally looked up at me, her eyes wide and wet, searching for some trace of the mother who always gave in. I held her gaze calm and unshaken, and for the first time, I think she realized she wasn't going to win. When you're ready to have a real conversation, I said evenly, Call me alone. Ashley swallowed hard and nodded faintly, though her tears kept coming. Lucas stood beside me and placed a quiet hand on my shoulder as I rose from my chair. Louise gathered her portfolio and gave me a small approving smile before we turned to leave. I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high and my dignity intact. The air outside was cold, but it felt clean, almost sharp like a new beginning, waiting just ahead. And with every step toward the door, I felt lighter, stronger, and sure of who I was again. The weeks after that night at Franco's were quiet in a way I didn't expect. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking in a panic. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long was gone, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I didn't hear from Ashley or Henry, and I didn't try to reach out. I needed the silence more than I realized. At first, I filled my days just keeping busy. I worked in my garden, I rearranged furniture, I cleaned every inch of my little duplex until it felt like new again. One afternoon, a knock came at my door. It was Janet, my new neighbor. She introduced herself with a smile and a warm casserole balanced on her hip. She said she'd heard what happened at Franco's from a friend at the bank who also knew Louise. She didn't ask for details. She just told me she thought I was brave. We started having coffee together a few times a week. She was a widow too, with her own stories about family members who thought they were entitled to more than she was willing to give. There was something comforting about sitting across from someone who didn't look at me with pity, but with quiet understanding. It was Janet who told me about the support group at the community center. They met on Tuesday evenings just a few blocks away, and she offered to drive me the first time. I almost said no, but something told me I should at least try. That first night, I sat in a circle of strangers listening to stories that made my own look almost tame. People talked about children forging signatures, draining accounts, leaving them with nothing. But they also talked about what came after, about learning to trust themselves again, about rebuilding. Little by little, I started speaking up. At first, just a few words, then more. And before long, they started looking to me as someone who could help guide others through it. Louise even referred a few of her clients to me, saying I had a gift for helping people see what they were worth. Janet and I began volunteering at the center on weekends, working with seniors who were vulnerable or unsure how to protect themselves, teaching them what to watch for, helping them set boundaries. Each time I saw someone's face light up with the realization that they could take back control, it reminded me of how far I'd come. My life was still simple. I still lived in my little duplex. I still wore the same burgundy dress on special occasions. But inside, I felt different, stronger, whole again. I no longer thought of myself as the woman who'd been ambushed at a restaurant. Now I thought of myself as the woman who stood up, walked out, and never let herself be cornered again. That was my quiet victory, and it was enough. The call came early in the morning, just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee. Lucas's name lit up on my phone, and before I even answered, I had a feeling what he was about to say. When his voice came through, it was quiet and careful, the way people speak when they know the news will land heavy. Mom, she had the baby last night. It's a girl, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Her name is Eleanor. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Eleanor, my mother's name. The sound of it hit me in a place I wasn't ready for. Lucas went on to say everyone was healthy and that Ashley had asked him to let me know visiting hours were open. I thanked him and hung up before my emotions got the better of me. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring out the window at the frost-covered grass, trying to decide what I wanted to do. Part of me wanted to grab my coat and drive straight to the hospital, to hold that baby in my arms and let myself forget everything that had happened between her parents and me. But another part of me, the part that had fought so hard to reclaim my dignity, knew I couldn't walk back into that room without setting the rules first. So instead of going to the hospital, I pulled a sheet of stationery from the drawer and began to write. Ashley, I began. Congratulations on the birth of your daughter. I am happy to hear she is healthy and here safely. I would like very much to meet her. I paused for a long time, letting the words settle before I continued. However, any contact we have going forward must respect the boundaries I've put in place. I will not discuss my finances, my decisions about the trust, or anything related to money. Those subjects are closed. I want to be a part of Eleanor's life, but I won't do it at the cost of my self-respect. If you are willing to meet under these terms, please call me and we can arrange something. I signed it simply Mom. It wasn't easy to write and even harder to seal the envelope. But as I walked it out to the mailbox and let it drop inside, I felt something shift in me. I could still love my daughter. I could still love my granddaughter. But I could also love myself enough to make sure they understood where I stood. And that was what mattered most now. If you've listened this far, there's something I want you to hear from me. It is never too late to stand up for yourself. I don't care how long you've been putting everyone else first, or how scared you feel when you finally say no. You are allowed to protect what you've built and who you are. For a long time, I believed being a good mother meant giving everything I had, even when there was nothing left for me. I thought love meant sacrifice without limits. But I've learned that love without boundaries isn't really love. It's surrender. The night at Franco's broke something in me, but it also woke me up. I realized I was still here, still capable, still strong, and so are you. You can decide that your dignity matters more than pleasing people who don't respect you. I still love my daughter, and I love my granddaughter more than I can say. But I can love them without letting them destroy my peace. I can love them and still say no when I need to. That is what self-respect looks like. So, if you're sitting in silence tonight wondering if you deserve better, let me tell you, you do. You deserve kindness. You deserve to be treated like a person, not a bank account or a burden. And you are stronger than you think. Take it one choice at a time. Draw your line. Hold it. And don't apologize for protecting yourself. Because the moment you choose yourself again, you'll feel something you may have forgotten. You'll feel free. And trust me, that freedom is worth everything.